Right, all praises to Yahweh Bahashim Yahushai, double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who will and teach well, who taught us his truth. This is your brother Yashamai from the GMS Atlanta camp. In today's video, I wanted to go into some um, important history pertaining to the Edict of Toleration, the Edict of Milan, and the Council of Nicea. Now, this video was inspired because it was brought up, this historical account was brought up during a class that we had this past weekend. And so it'd been a while since I went into this topic, and why not go back into it? All right. 1 Peter 3 verse 15 says, "But sanctify the Most High in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of hope that is in you with meekness and fear." The NLT reads, "Instead, you must worship Hamashiach as Lord of your life, and if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it." And that's why it's important to go into the history, because as we are about to go into it, you will see that these events help us to cut the Christian belief of the Trinity doctrine, okay? Because that's where it was established, okay? The scriptures, talk about being occupied in prophecy. Well, our apostles also teach us that for us to understand the mystery, you have to understand the history, okay? So that's the purpose of this video, is going into the history of these three events in history. Okay, so let's set the stage here. So these three events happened in the early 300s. Okay, and these were a result of the persecution of the so-called Christians. Now, why do I say the so-called Christians? The reason being is because we don't call ourselves Christians. See, when you go into the first account that the word Christian is used, I believe it's in Acts 11, verse 26 or 28. But when you go into that account in the town of Antioch, that term was used as a derogatory term for the believers, for the disciples. Okay, and the reason that it was used as a derogatory term is because it comes from two words. All right, it comes from the Greek word Christos, and it comes from the Latin suffix ianos, Ianos, ianos. Now, the word Christos means anointed, and the suffix ianos means pertaining to or slave of. So let's get some context. In those times, there was a lot of false prophets saying that they were sent by Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. All right. And so it got so bad that the people of the town began to just call him Christos. Okay. They would say, "Oh, there's another anointed one. There's another Christos." So when the apostles were called Christians, they were basically degrading our Savior by calling him just another false prophet. Okay. So bear with me as we go through this video, because I may unknowingly use the term Christian, but I'm going to try my best to say believers, okay, or disciples or apostles. Okay, so again, these three events in history, which we're going to go over, happened in the early 300s of the Roman Empire. Okay. Oh yeah, another going into that Latin suffix ianos, that means pertaining to or slave to. Now, the Romans, if they found out that you were a slave to something because of their pride, that was something that they looked down on you. Okay, and Paul himself warned us about this happening. It says, this is 1 Corinthians 4:13. It says, "Being defamed, we entreat. We are made as the filth of the world, and are the offscouring of all things unto this day. I write not these things to shame you, but as my beloved sons, I warn you. See, in the same manner that our forefathers were being made fun of, in that same manner, we are being made fun of today. People, when they look at us, you know, they don't call us, sons of the Most High, man. Okay, but prophecy is gonna happen. Hosea 1 verse 10, in the place where it was said, "This is not my people; there they shall be called the sons of the living God." Okay, of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Okay, so now let's go back um, into the point of this video. Okay, so these three events in history are the result of the persecuting of the believers, all right, and also a disagreement of doctrine. Okay, now the first major persecution of the apostles or of the disciples, again, I'm not going to say Christians, but the first major persecution of the believers was during the time when ancient Rome was burned down, the year 64 AD. It was blamed on the believers, and it was said um, that the believers were the culprits behind the burning of the Roman Empire. All right, but also even prior to this, the believers had begun to have a target painted on their back. How? Because um, though the Romans allowed people to celebrate their faith, or yeah, yeah, I guess you could use that word, or to observe their faith, they also required the people that they would take over to give subservience to their false deities. Okay, and so as the believers, our forefathers wouldn't, they wouldn't bend the knee to their false gods. Okay, so even before 64 AD, during the burning of Rome, there was already a rift between the believers and the ancient Romans because of this reason. It's very important to note, okay? It's very important to note that the ancient Romans believed highly in their false gods. The ancient Romans thought that they were a great power because of their gods. Okay, why is this important to mention? This is important to mention because when 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 the believers wouldn't pray to their false gods, the ancient Roman Empire would take that as a form of disrespect, basically saying, "Hey, you you must want this empire to fall." Okay, so there was already a rift between the two parties. Okay, so now let's fast forward from there. Okay, let's fast forward from 64 AD. Let's fast forward to the time of Diocletian. Okay, now we 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 just established that the Romans associated their power and strength as a blessing from their gods, right? So now let's fast forward to the time of Diocletian. Diocletian was the uh, 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 was the emperor in 284. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of this, but brothers can go into the history. Okay, so basically, he wasn't born rich. He actually rose up through the way of the military. Okay, now during this time, this was when the Roman Empire was going through a very difficult time. Okay, they were being attacked on the north from the Germanic tribes, and they were being attacked on the east by the Sassanians, which they traced their lineage back to the Persians, to the pre-Islamic Persians. Okay, so at this time, when Diocletian comes onto the scene, Rome is dealing with civil wars, is dealing with inflation, and so it's beginning to collapse at this time. Okay, and so Diocletian, he gets on the scene, and at this point, the ancient Roman Empire is huge. Okay, and so he says, well, look, we're being attacked here, and it's because it's too much empire for just one emperor. And so what he does was he creates what's called the tetrarch. Okay, or the tetrarchy. Okay, so basically he divides the great Roman Empire. he divides it into two. Okay, hold on a minute. I gotta pull up here. He divides it into two empires. Okay, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. And what he does in doing this, he creates what's called the tetrarchy. And what the tetrarchy means is it means the rule of four. Okay, and so what he did was he set up what's called two Augustuses or two emperors. Okay, one emperor for the Western and one emperor for the Eastern. Okay, well, that's only two. Well, yes, but underneath each emperor there was a Caesar. Okay, so he set himself up as the ruler of the East, and then he set up another emperor by the name of Maximin as the ruler of the West. Okay, and then under these two, he set up two Caesars that would take the throne after they died. Okay, and one of those Caesars for the East was Galerius. Okay, so Galerius was under Diocletian. All right, and then to the east, that Caesar was Constantius. Okay, Constantius would would be the father of Constantine the Great. Okay, so let's go back here now. So now during the time of Diocletian, after he breaks up the Roman Empire and sets up the Tetrarchy, um, he's seeing that his empire is beginning to crumble. Okay, and I mentioned earlier that the Romans thought that they were in power because of their deities. Okay, so he gets on the scene and he says, "Oh well, wait a minute. I know why the ancient Roman Empire is going down the shitter. It's because we have these, so-called Christians that aren't praying to our gods." So what did he do? Him and his Caesar, Galerius, um, uh, uh, Galerius, they begin what's called the Great Persecution. Okay, and again, brothers can go into right here. It says the Great Persecution was the last most severe and most systematic campaign against the Christians. Okay, so basically, this was their futile efforts of trying to sustain their Roman Empire by saying, "Look, our gods aren't being prayed to. These Christians are not praying to our gods, and that's why we're failing." So what did he do? They began to burn down churches. They began to throw the believers into prison. They began to kill us. Um, Basically, people had to denounce their faith or be killed. Okay, and by the way, this is what we're coming into again, right? Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9. There is nothing new. That which has been. Oh no, Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9. There's nothing new under the sun. Okay, but anyways, so this great persecution happened in the year 303. Okay, and so basically the believers are going through it. Okay, but then the Roman Empire is still falling. Okay, so now you have now we can go into what's called the Edict of Toleration. Okay, because the same Galerius, which was the Caesar of the East, all right, he at first he despised the believers. All right, he was the one that he was the overseer of the great persecution. Okay, um, but ultimately, what would end up happening is he got sick. Okay, and he believed that the reason that he was getting sick and dying was because of the persecuting of the believers. Okay, and so what did he end up doing? He's the one that actually wrote what's called the Edict of Toleration. Okay, and that's the first historical event. Now, the Edict of Toleration is also known as the Edict of Serdica. Okay, and this was passed in 311. Okay, so this was what is that? 8 years after so 8 years of straight catching hell. The same dude that started giving us hell, Galerius, was the same dude that ended up stopping it, because he understood that, hey, I'm being judged by Yahweh Hashem, Yahweh Shai. So basically, what the edict of toleration is it stop destroying the churches, it stop taking the land and property of the believers. Um, it, it stopped the arresting of the believers. Okay, but you know, it's very important to point out the name of the edict. Okay, the name of the edict is the Edict of Toleration. Okay, so it didn't make the believers it didn't make the believers equal to anybody else. It just basically they stopped hunting us down. Okay, and it should also be noted too that when Galerius passed this edict, um, wouldn't you know that he actually asked the believers to pray for him and to pray for the Roman Empire? Which, matter of fact, I've got that pulled up. Yeah, Ezekiel 36 and 23. It says, "And I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned among the heathen, which ye have profaned in the midst of them, and the heathen shall know that I am Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Say it the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, when I shall be sanctified you in when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes." All right. So now we use this for end time prophecy, but even in the ancient Roman Empire, Yahweh Hashem Yahushua was getting the glory because Galerius understood that he was being judged by the Most High. Okay, so again, the the name says it all. All right, the believers were not equal; they were just tolerated. All right, they weren't hunted down anymore. They didn't have to denounce their faith. Okay, so that's the Edict of Toleration, which was written in 311 AD. All right, so now we go into the Edict of Milan. Okay, now the Edict of Milan was put into effect 2 years after the Edict of Toleration, and this was put into effect by Constantine the Great. Okay, this was the son of Constantius, which was the Caesar of the Western Roman Empire, as I mentioned earlier. So, what is the difference between the Edict of Milan and the Edict of Toleration? Well, again, the Edict of Toleration just they stopped hunting us down. What the Edict of Milan did, it basically it gave us it made believers equal. Okay, we we were able to I guess if you wanted to, you could run for public office. Any land that was taken or any property that was taken was either given back, or if it wasn't given back, they were paid money. um, but also too, um, it it didn't, some people will say that Constantine, because the Edict of Milan, some people will say that this was when Constantine made Christianity the um, religion for the Roman Empire, and that's not true. Okay, because what the Edict of Milan do is, yes, it stopped the hunting down of the believers, but it also allowed other religions to be practiced. Okay, not just Christianity, or not just our faith. Okay, but Muslims. He basically said, do as thou will. Okay, so very important. Um, very important to make mention of that. Let me see here. Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, it would be. I might mention it here too, but basically, when Christianity was made the official Roman religion, it would be later on by a man named Thea Thesodius. Yeah, Thesodius. But okay, yeah. Let me see here. The Romans consider themselves the Romans edict of totalitarian of toleration, the way of the ancestors could be traced to the founders. Yeah, again, I'm not gonna read all of this. It says that led to various forms of produce that Eusebius, little piece of the church text, religious piece of the church edict. Yeah, I'm not going to read this whole thing just for the sake of time. Like I said, this is just a quick crash course. Okay, so now let's fast forward now. Okay, so now we went through the Edict of Toleration in 311. We just went through the Edict of Milan in 313. The next history, the next historical point that I want to get into is the Council of Nicaea. Okay, so the Council of Nicaea, as you can see here, it happened in the year 325. So this was 14 years after the Edict of Milan. Okay, so what's the Council of Nicaea? All right, so now um, let's understand the context here. Okay, so now 14 years after it's been said that it's okay to practice, Christianity or any other doctrine, the faith begins to grow. Okay, so you have the believers, flourishing. Okay, and so what ended up happening is you had people that had different doctrines. Okay, this was really it can be said that out of the Council of Nicaea, this was where it was agreed upon that of the Trinity, that Yahweh is equal to Yahweh, and that Yahweh is also the Most High. That's the Council of Nicaea. Okay, so now let's get into it. So as 14 years passed by after the Edict of Milan, the faith is flourishing, and there's different doctrines. Okay, and just for some brief history, you had a man by the name of Arius. I thought that I had him pulled up. Arius. Yeah, Arius right here. Arius. Arius DMC. Arius Nicaea. Arius. Okay, so basically you had this dude, Arius. So he basically was stating that Yahweh was created and that he was not equal to the Father, but he was subordinate, which is true. Okay, so you had people following after this belief. Okay, and then you had another group of doctrine which was led by a man named Athanasius. Okay, matter of fact, I'll put that name up there too. There you go. Athanasius of Alexandria. Okay, so this guy was saying that no, that he was basically pushing that Trinity doctrine. That the Son is equal, that the Son is the Father. Okay, see, this is where the Christian belief comes from. Okay, so now you had these two factions of people. Now, understand that the Roman Empire is failing. Okay, so when you had these two factions of believers, you had they would get into fights. There was uproars of the people, and so Constantine, he sees this, and he's trying to save his empire, and so he's like, hey, I can't have these two people, fighting. So what does he do? He gets a total of 318 bishops, and he gathers them in the city of Nicaea. Okay, hence you get the Council of Nicaea. And so basically, what ended up happening is you had 318 people, all right, and they were put in a room, and they were basically, what's the word that they were debating on why on their factions. And basically the goal for Constantine was, hey, I'm gonna get you in this room, and then y'all have to agree on this doctrine, and then the fighting stops. So that's what he did. It should be noted too that during this debate, Constantine himself, the emperor, he he was actually sitting in during these debates. Okay, now let me say that in today's terms, imagine that you have the president today, and he gathers the the Muslims, and he gathers the Christians because they're fighting, and he says, I need you guys to debate, and I'm going to sit in that room with you, and you can't leave until you come into an agreement. Let me ask you this: would any agreement that these two people come from, when you have the president sitting in that room because he stands to gain something, would you believe anything that came from that room? No. Why? Because you would understand, hey, it that's false doctrine. That doctrine was only debated amongst men, and it was only debated amongst men so that the fighting could cease, right? The answer is yes. Now, why do I bring that up? Because that alone should blow apart the Trinity doctrine. Because this is where the Trinity doctrine, this is where it was agreed upon by men after debating that Yahushua it was equal to the Father. So, the fact that Constantine was in that room making them debate, that alone should be like, hey man, something's going on here. Okay? But ultimately, what ended up happening, again, as I mentioned, you had Arius and Athanasius. Um, During that debate, Athanasius's people were, I guess, declared the winner, and so Arius was labeled as a what's the word, as a heretic, and he was basically exiled. And so from the Council of Nicaea, after that, er- everybody taught the same doctrine, which was that Trinity doctrine. Okay, and we can go through the scriptures too. I'm not gonna pull up many of them just for the sake of time, but you got Hebrews 2 and 16 down to 18. It says, "For verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. Wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be merciful and a faithful high priest in things pertaining to the Most High Yahweh, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to succor them that are tempted." So Yahweh Shai, the Son, came as a man. Okay, he didn't come as an angel. He didn't come as the Most High. All right. Um, Matter of fact, what's the other account? I believe it's in Acts 7, when Stephen is being stoned. He looks up, he sees the Father, and at the right hand he sees the Son. Okay, so how can they be two in one? Another one here is Proverbs, the 8th chapter. Okay, where it talks about wisdom, but we understand this is talking about Yahweh Shai. Says, "Yahweh possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there was no depth, I was brought forth." Okay, so Yahweh Shai he was created. Okay, even Wisdom of Solomon, I believe that's the 7th chapter. Yeah, Wisdom of Solomon goes into that too. How he came in as a man, being fashioned in the womb for 10 months. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it, man. Just a quick crash course. The Edict of Toleration stopped the persecution of the believers because the persecution was based upon the belief that the downfall of Rome was because the believers of the way were not praying to their Roman and Greek gods. Okay, then the Edict of Milan made all religions okay to be practiced, and it gave back property that was taken. And then the Council of Nicaea was where it was established that, falsely by men, that Yahweh Shai is the Father. So hopefully this has been edifying. And until the next one, I'm gonna say Shalom.